So tonight's talk is on the Aditapariya Sutta. Sometimes it's called the Aditapariya Sutta, just to emphasize the Fire Discourse. Those that have been on retreat will remember this is it's been the Saturday evening talk for the last 3 or 4 retreats. This is the third discourse, the third teaching the Buddha ever presented. It's considered one of the 3 most important teachings. The first was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where the Buddha first taught 4 Noble Truths. That was presented to the 5 wanderers that he spent the last few years, the previous years, studying and attempting to develop an understanding of the nature of human life. It wasn't until he left those 5 fellows and meditated on his own that it was able to develop an awakened mind, a fully mature human mind. And so he presented that first teaching to his 5 buddies. Immediately after that first teaching, one of those men, Khandana, declared all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. The Buddha said, "You got it. You are now Anakhandana, the one who understands." So at the Buddha's very first teaching, a human being awakened. The second teaching, probably about 2 or 3 weeks after this first teaching, at least recorded. It doesn't mean I don't mean to imply that the Buddha didn't converse with these fellows, but the next recorded teaching was the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, the sutta on the not-self characteristic. And after that sutta, the other 4 fellows awakened. And if you understand that the Buddha didn't teach a curriculum like we might have in a college course, even a high school course. In other words, you start from this point, you go to the next point, and you develop an understanding of a particular subject. The Buddha taught almost always situationally. So the first discourse, he laid out the 4 Noble Truths, what he awakened to, and the path to developing and end the cessation of ignorance of these 4 Noble Truths. And so a bit of speculation on my part, but over the next few weeks, the Buddha must have been hearing conversations between this newly formed sangha and how to understand this idea of an impermanent self within an impermanent environment. So that was the second discourse on the not-self characteristic. And the meaning of the word anatta. Anatta means not self. And that was a common term during the Buddha's teaching career. But the Buddha used it in a completely different way. In fact, a completely contradictory way to the way it was usually applied. The Buddha used the word anatta to simply remind that views of self, or views that are used to form a self, are rooted in ignorance. They're wrong views. Let go of the views. So the Buddha wasn't saying that there's no such thing as a self. He's simply saying that the views that we use to constitute a self are wrong views. Let go of the views. So now, this is a month or 2 later. During the Buddha's time, most of the spiritual teachings were taught by Brahmins, and most of the Brahmins had their own particular take on their presentation of the Vedas, which were the precursor to modern Hinduism. And including in that, and simply part of the culture too, sacrifices were common. So this was a spiritual ideology that was based on worship and sacrifice in order to gain merit and to allow yourself through worship and sacrifice to transform the problems of having a human life. The Buddha saw that as something that didn't really add up, and so he rejected that, and that's what led to his developing an understanding of 4 Noble Truths. So a couple months after these first 2 teachings, the Buddha uses the metaphor of a local fire worshiping cult to teach how worship leads to a distracted and distorted view of reality. And it also inflames passions that further conditions a mind rooted in ignorance. Is that clear? I didn't lose anybody yet so far? Okay. It'll be more clear once I read the sutta, I hope. So the metaphor is fire and flame. And the previous sutta, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, teaches how it's because of wrong views of self. As we come in contact through our 5 physical senses and consciousness rooted in wrong views, we continue to establish a self rooted on those wrong views. So the metaphor of, and we become inflamed by that. We become passionate about continuing to establish and maintain this ego self. And the reason why that is so, it takes such great passion, is because ultimately there's nothing there. We're putting all this effort into maintaining a view of what the Buddha described as like foam on the ocean. And so you can see it takes intense and constant effort. It takes a fire of passion to be maintained, to maintain a self-referential ego self. Clear? Okay. So now the Buddha's at Gaya Head, and now there's 1,000 monks. In this short period of time, the word of an awakened human being has spread so quickly over northern India and southern Nepal that there's now about 1,000 monks in attendance and part of the Buddha Sangha. The Buddha addressed those monks. Monks, the all is a flame. What all is a flame? The eye is a flame. Forms are a flame. Consciousness at the eye is a flame. That's an interesting line. The Buddha ascribes a consciousness to each of the senses. In other words, there's an eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, etc. And so what does that mean? Obviously, there's not a separate function in the body where the eye is thinking differently than the mouth is thinking or the ear is thinking. It's that interpretive consciousness through our senses rooted in ignorance. So this is not consciousness with a big C, not a grand consciousness. It's consciousness rooted in ignorance. And in that way, as something comes in contact with the eye, because the entire being is aflame with this passion of self-referential views, interpretation starts taking place, and which feeds that thinking rooted in ignorance. Consciousness at the eye. Contact at the eye is a flame, and whatever there is that arises in dependence on contact at the eye, experience as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, meaning ambivalent, that too is a flame. So even an ambivalence to life is a flame. Why? Because it's in that ambivalence that we're continuing a very subtle form of ignorance. The Buddha continues, aflame with what? Aflame with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, and the fire of delusion. Those are the 3 defilements used with slightly different terms. The 3 defilements are craving, aversion, and deluded thinking. It's the 3 defilements that we recognize and overcome through a well-focused Dhamma practice, a focus that is framed by the Eightfold Path. Let me read that line again. Aflame with what? Aflame with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion. Aflame, I tell you, with birth, aging, and death, with sorrows, regrets, pains, distresses, and despairs. That's exactly how the Buddha describes dukkha, if you remember that. And he usually continues that with the not getting what is desired is dukkha, until you could becoming aflamed with that. We're always chasing after what we want, what we think we need to be happy and secure. Not getting what is desired is dukkha. We become inflamed with that. In short, the 5 clinging aggregates are dukkha, meaning the ongoing personal experience of suffering is something we become inflamed with. The Buddha continues, the ear is aflame, sounds are aflame. The nose is aflame, aromas are aflame. The tongue is aflame, flavors are aflame, the body is aflame. Tactile sensations are aflame, the intellect is aflame. Remember, this is the ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance that the Buddha is referring to. The intellect is aflame. Ideas are aflame. How can ideas be aflame? Because they're self-referential ideas. They're not ideas that are leading towards awakening. They're not ideas that have any other usefulness except to continue to ignore ignorance. So even those ideas, because they're only self-referential ideas, they're rooted in continued I-making, are aflame. They're rooted in passion arising from ignorance. Ideas are aflame. Consciousness at the intellect is aflame. The Buddha is pointing out in very strong terms that our ongoing thinking, because it's rooted in ignorance, can only give rise to further inflamed passions. Another more moderate word for inflame would be distracted. Distraction equals dukkha. Contact at the intellect is aflame. Meaning, so now the sixth sense base, the five physical senses, and that sixth sense of consciousness, ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance, coalesce in that last line. Contact at the intellect is aflame. If we're stuck in wrong views, no matter what's coming through, ultimately is going to lead to more confusion, delusion, and suffering. This is often obscured by the occasional and often pleasantness of life. Just because life is not experienced 100% of the time as suffering, it certainly isn't, is it? For most of us. We're striving to establish some pleasantness in our lives, and we're usually successful. But like a lobster being put in the cold pot and the water, the heat being turned up, that's the same thing, that we become deluded by the pleasantness we've created in our own life because we're now creating an identity through that. Life isn't so bad. That we're sitting in that pot of slightly boiling water and we don't even realize it. That's that ambivalent part of life too. We're just kind of floating along. But there's that underlying, it's almost a fear, and I was talking about this last week. The reason why we're here and the reason why people leave their comfortable lives at times, even if it's just for a weekend once a year, like on a yearly retreat, because we feel there's something missing. Because even though we're that deluded, that contact coming through our deluded thinking inflames this passion that continues to ignore ignorance. Most of us feel like we're missing something. And that can be something that can lead to feelings of ongoing anxiety or just a constant dissatisfaction or disappointment with our lives. Something's wrong. That's the first noble truth. The Buddha left his father's kingdom, that slightly boiling soup that he described as a confining space. He had everything that any young man could ever want. And yet he knew that something was missing. And he left that comfortable life, and he studied and practiced some very severe ascetic practices, finally leading to the awakening that he sought. Life is disappointing. Dukkha occurs. Why? Because of becoming inflamed with the passion of continuing to establish a self where it can't be established. Because that self is rooted in wrong views. It's rooted in a misunderstanding of what? The three marks of existence, of the impermanent nature of all things. The misunderstanding of self, the not self characteristic, the second sutta that the Buddha, second discourse the Buddha ever taught. And now we're getting to that third mark of existence, dukkha. How does it arise? Because of the fires of passion arising from a misunderstanding of self and the not self characteristic. The Buddha continues. And whatever there is that arises in dependence on contact at the intellect, experience as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, that too is a flame. Whatever there is, whatever we're using to establish wrong views of self in this impermanent environment and claiming that this is permanent, this is me, this is who I am, that too is a flame. The individual objects, events, views, and ideas that we use to establish a self are all aflame. Aflame with what? Aflame with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion. Again, aflame with the fires of the three defilements. Aflame, I say, with birth, aging, and death, with sorrows, lamentations, or regrets, pains, distresses, and despairs. Seeing thus, the well-instructed disciple of the noble one, meaning those that follow the Eightfold Path, the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones grows disenchanted with the eye, disenchanted with forms, disenchanted with consciousness at the eye, disenchanted with contact at the eye. And whatever there is that arises in dependence on contact at the eye, experience as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, with that too he grows disenchanted. What does that mean, disenchanted? It's another way of saying that the fires of passion are becoming extinguished. We're no longer enchanted with conceit, with continuing to establish a self in an environment that it can't be established in, meaning not just an impermanent environment, but an environment that is rooted in wrong views. In the Nagara Sutta, the Buddha describes the getting caught back in the feedback loop of self-referential views stuck in consciousness rooted in ignorance. And so do you see how we continue to ignore ignorance within that framework of feedback loops? And it's through contact and the passion to maintain a self-referential ego self that continues that feedback loop. Again, another word for feedback loop is just common ignorance of Four Noble Truths, the way things are. This is such a powerful sutta, using the analogy of the flame. Let me continue. He grows disenchanted with the ear, he grows disenchanted with the nose, he grows disenchanted with the tongue. He grows disenchanted with the body. All the things that we're using, the sense organs and that consciousness, the sixth sense of ongoing consciousness rooted in ignorance that we're using to remain enchanted with the self that we've created. A wise disciple, those that have developed the framework of the Eightfold Path, become disenchanted with the entire process of eye-making. And it's another very powerful and useful word, disenchanted. Enchanted, the word enchanted has a almost mythical and magical connotation to it, doesn't it? And it points to something that is almost illusory in nature. I've created a self out of self-enchantment, and the things that I've attached myself to, clinging to, I'm enchanted with those too. Why? Because they continue to establish me. Do you see how we become inflamed with the passion of self-establishment? Is it clear? Yes? Okay. So growing disenchanted is something that most people would have a lot of resistance, especially if they don't understand the point of the Buddhist teaching, because it almost sounds contrary to the way we're supposed to be living our lives. We're supposed to be enchanted with everything, aren't we? But from wrong views, that enchantment only continues the three defilements of desire, aversion, or craving and aversion, and ongoing deluded thinking. It's the problem. It's not the solution to life. The solution to life isn't to continue to fool ourselves to think that everything is wonderful while the pot's boiling. The solution to the ongoing problem of dukkha, of constant disappointment, or ongoing disappointment, I should say, not constant, is to recognize the impermanent nature of all things and the wrong views of self that we've created for ourselves. That's the ignorance that the Buddha awakened to. Remember, dependent origination says, from ignorance of Four Noble Truths, all manner of suffering arises. Ultimately, that ignorance is ignorance of what constitutes a self in an environment that's constantly prone to impermanence. The Buddha continues, he grows disenchanted with the intellect, disenchanted with the ideas, disenchanted with consciousness at the intellect, disenchanted with contact at the intellect. Meaning now when things are coming when we're coming in contact with the outside world, because we've learned to see things from the point of view of right view rather than wrong views rooted in ignorance, it no longer gives rise to the flames of passion, because we're no longer enchanted by it. Again, we're no longer seeing the illusion brought about by ignorance. We're seeing things in reality, right view. When the Buddha describes right view, he teaches that right view is a view that completely understands the nature of suffering, meaning it understands this whole process of I-making in an impermanent environment, resulting in dukkha. That's what Kandana realized when he stated, all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. It's our conditioned thinking rooted in ignorance that gives rise to ongoing suffering. And because of impermanence, it's possible to recognize and abandon that which we hope to establish as permanent, meaning I-making. The Buddha continues, and whatever there is that arises in dependence on contact at the intellect, the ongoing thinking, dependence on wrong views is what the Buddha is teaching here. Whatever there is that arises in dependence on contact at the intellect, experience as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, he grows disenchanted with that too. Disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. The fires are going out. Through dispassion, he is fully released. Through dispassion, from giving up the burden of trying to establish a self that cannot be established, except in our own minds, through our own ignorance. Through dispassion, he is fully released. Another way that the Buddha described the quality of an awakened human being, the quality of their mind is release. Release from clinging to wrong views. With full release, there is knowledge. I'm fully released. We know it. We have the experience. The Buddha describes the third noble truth as cessation of dukkha, of suffering is possible, and that the Eightfold Path is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. So how do we know that the path is working? Because we know it, because we realize we're fully released. I am no longer clinging to wrong views. And along the way, every one of you has mentioned this to me in most classes, recognizing the diminishing of these passions and the awakening of our own minds to the true nature of who we are, to a calm and peaceful mind, to the need for things to not be any different than they are. With full release, there is a knowledge fully released. He discerns that birth is ended. The holy life, or the well-integrated life, the holy life can have religious connotations. The Buddha wasn't trying to teach a religion. So the way to understand holy is in its holistic form, meaning that the Eightfold Path has been fully integrated. The integrated life fulfilled, the task is done. There is nothing further for this world. That idea of giving birth, we've talked about this a lot in relation to karma and rebirth. It's not so much of a future birth. It's that because ignorance has ended, there's now nothing left that will give rise or give birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. Birth is ended. The birth of ongoing ignorance is ended. That relates to the whole idea of becoming. What am I going to become? If I don't have the framework to change my thinking rooted in wrong views, I can only become further ignorant. But if I have the proper framework, meaning the Eightfold Path, then I can become awakened. And that's the potential each moment has. That's what the Buddha is speaking to in this sutta too. This concludes with this is what the Buddha said, and gratified, the monks were delighted at his words. And while this explanation was being given, the hearts and minds of the 1,000 monks, through no clinging, being sustained, were fully released from the fermentations and the effluents, meaning being fully released from the defilements. There's more to the sutta. That's about 3/4 of the way through, but the rest of it is just my commentary. By recognizing and abandoning how we give rise to a self-referential ego self and the strategies we continue to employ to maintain that, by recognizing that, and bringing to cessation those passions that we use to maintain a self-referential ego self through the Eightfold Path, we're able to blow out the fires of our own passion. So the word nibbana, which describes the ongoing state of an awakened human being, it's often wrongly described as a type of like a Buddhist heaven. Nibbana means extinguished, as in extinguishing the fires of passion. And that's precisely what the Eightfold Path develops. So that's the next talk. Thank you. Before we go around the room, any specific questions on this talk or on this sutta? Do you all see how it fits in the Dhamma? Well, let's just go around the room and hear what you have to say and how your practice is going. Stefan, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. A while ago, I got myself a copy of the middle-length discourses, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, largely, and recently started reading them, which I found to be very interesting and I think helpful. and I continue to have the thought, it's just sort of crazy that you might spend so much time in contact with formal Buddhist organizations and not until relatively recently in my life be encouraged to pick up, a chunk of Pali Canon and read some of it, because
it is surprising, isn't it?
This is the real stuff. So you got to be familiar. But so I just read 4 or 5 of the first suttas in the collection today. It's good. It's nice I do think it helps to see how things connect a little bit, and actually a lot of Bhikkhu Bodhi's commentary on the translation.
Yeah,
I find helpful just to kind of see, like, among different scholars, these are the different shades of meaning that some of them have tried to get at, and that helps to kind of flesh out some of the Pali terms that we hear. Anyway, that's all I got.
Well, thank you. The middle length discourses translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi is an excellent book. The only, and it's not something, there's something wrong with the book. It's written as a presentation of the discourses. What has to be remembered when you're reading any of it, and I say this often in class, when you read any of the suttas, is the context in which the Buddha taught. And over time, and you'll know, I think you probably noticed this already, but over time you realize when you read enough of the suttas that they're all taught in context of the very first teaching, the Four Noble Truths. And they're taught in context of dependent origination. The Buddha never taught anything out of context of that. The difficulty can be when you just pick up a book like the Middle Length Discourses and not able to recognize the consistency of the Buddhist teachings and the overall context. But that's an excellent book to read. It's a very good translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Yeah, if you didn't know anything else and just picked out one sutta and read it, it would be confusing. So you do kind of want to have the framework first.
Yeah.
But,
well, and the framework is often not even presented. I mean, even people that mention the suttas oftentimes pick apart one sutta and lose the overall context, and then take that as gospel teaching. So the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta are both excellent examples of that, where small sections of those suttas have been used to justify meditation and mindfulness practices that are out of the context that the Buddha actually taught. But you wouldn't see that unless you understood the whole context of what the Buddha was teaching. And you're so right that it's surprising that you can spend a lot of time, many years, in so-called Buddhism and never even hear about the Pali Canon or the importance of understanding those. Glad you're reading it. And really the reason why I wrote Becoming Buddha too, to put it all in the proper context so you can understand it. So glad to see it tonight, Stefan. Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Nice to be here with all of you. Not really much to add. Really enjoy this sutta, and like I said, I really appreciate you giving some talks earlier and going into some other suttas prior to this that helped put it into a larger context.
Yeah. That's important. I'm glad you're here tonight. Kevin, too. Good to see you.
See you. Yeah, it's goes very deep, and it really, again, it just encompasses the whole Dhamma.
Yeah.
And origination, talking about contact and consciousness. It's in a very indirect way that sort of makes it comprehensible a little bit.
Yeah.
So, that extinguishment of the flames.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you think about, I've used two different descriptions of the Buddhist describing an awakened human being. Another quality of mind that he said is that mind is calm or at peace, a mind of equanimity. And if you think about having a mind that is inflamed with the passions of self-establishment and self-maintenance, there's never any calm there, is there? Or it's very little. But underlying, again, it's that ongoing peaceful mind that we're really all looking for. We may not even realize it at first, why we're looking for something else in our lives, something that maybe we'll call it spiritual, maybe even religious, although that the Buddha didn't teach anything religious, or I would say not even all that spiritual, just practical. But we're looking for it because our minds are troubled in some way. And so the Buddha found a way. He recognized the cause of that troubled mind, not so much the ongoing physical troubles of the world, although that's important to recognize where they come from. But ultimately it is that troubled state of mind, that mind that is constantly filled with passion for self-establishment, that is the problem. And so recognizing that, and this is really a comment on how this sutta, and really the first three suttas, encompasses the entire Dhamma. Because recognizing that and abandoning that, becoming disenchanted, in other words, it's just plain damn tired of constantly establishing a self. Because it takes an awful lot of effort to do it. Become disenchanted with the whole process. Let it go. Take refuge in our practice, in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Because it leads to an ongoing life of lasting peace and equanimity. We don't have to do it. When we finally get to that point of awakening, of full human maturity, we realize there's nothing we have to do and there's nothing we should do. We're here. We're established. What are we going to do with our life? Might as well awaken. Thank you. It was a great class. I had one announcement, but I can't think of what it was. Not important.
Dinner went well.
Oh, the Dhamma dinner was great. We're gonna do one in May, probably right after the May retreat. Yeah, it was just wonderful.
I wish I was out of town.
Step on. Everybody else was there but you. It really was. It's just a wonderful. It's just a wonderful experience. I mean, that's the Dhamma means generosity, and it was just a room full of people with great generosity of spirit. So yeah, I'm going to do it. Angel she kind of chastised me for not doing one in May. Angel runs Loving Oven. So we'll make sure we do it in May and again at Thanksgiving. I can't think of what there wasn't something else. We'll finish with the Metta Sutta, as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body, and let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace. So we can leave the cushions right where they are.
Okay.
For Saturday.